Grace had always been proud of her work. For 8 long years, she had walked through the front door of the Henderson mansion every morning at 7 sharp. The house stood like a palace in the wealthy neighborhood of Oakwood Hills, with its tall white columns and perfectly trimmed hedges. Most people driving by would slow down just to admire it. She knew every corner of that house better than her own small apartment. She knew that Mrs. Henderson liked her coffee with exactly 2 sugars and a splash of cream. She knew that their dog, Buddy, would always try to steal socks from the laundry basket. She knew that Mr. Henderson kept his important papers in the 3rd drawer of his mahogany desk, and she was careful never to disturb them while dusting. The Hendersons had trusted her with everything. When they went on vacation to Europe last summer, Grace had stayed in the house for 2 weeks, watering plants and making sure everything was perfect for their return. When Mr. Henderson's elderly mother came to visit, it was Grace who helped her with her medications and made sure she was comfortable. When Mrs. Henderson was sick with the flu, Grace had even picked up groceries and cooked soup for the family. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Grace parked her old Honda in the driveway and used her key to enter through the side door. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Mrs. Henderson had left early for her yoga class, and their son was away at college. Mr. Henderson was probably already in his home office, getting ready for another day of running his successful tech company. Grace began her routine, starting with the kitchen. She wiped down the granite counters and loaded the dishwasher with the breakfast dishes. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, making everything gleam. This was her favorite time of day in the house, when everything was peaceful and she could take pride in making their home beautiful. She moved through the house methodically, dusting furniture and organizing rooms. The living room with its expensive paintings and soft leather furniture. The dining room where the Hendersons hosted dinner parties for Mr. Henderson's business partners. The guest rooms that always had to be ready for unexpected visitors. Around 10:30, she was vacuuming the hallway upstairs when she heard Mr. Henderson calling her name from downstairs. His voice sounded different than usual, sharper, more demanding. "Grace, come down here right now." She turned off the vacuum and hurried down the stairs, wondering what could be wrong. Maybe she had accidentally moved something she shouldn't have. Maybe there was a problem with something she had cleaned yesterday. Mr. Henderson was standing in the doorway of his study, his face red with anger. Grace had never seen him look like this before. In all her years working for the family, he had always been polite, even friendly. He would ask about her daughter's school grades and remember her birthday with a small bonus. "Is there something wrong, Mr. Henderson?" Grace asked, her heart starting to beat faster. He pointed toward his study. "My watch collection. It's gone." Grace felt confused. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "Don't play dumb with me," Mr. Henderson snapped. "3 of my most valuable watches are missing from my safe, and you're the only one who has access to this room." The words hit Grace like a punch to the stomach. She stared at him, trying to understand what he was saying. "Mr. Henderson, I would never take anything from your family. You know me. I've worked here for 8 years. "That's exactly why you knew where to look," he said, his voice getting louder. "You knew about my watch collection. You knew I kept them in the safe. You probably watched me open it dozens of times." Grace felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "Sir, I promise you I have never touched your safe. I've never even looked inside it. I would never steal from you." But Mr. Henderson wasn't listening. He was pacing back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. "Those watches were worth more than $50,000. My father's Rolex, the Omega I bought to celebrate my first big business deal. The Patek Philippe my wife gave me for our anniversary. They're all gone." "Maybe you moved them somewhere else?" Grace suggested desperately. "Maybe Mrs. Henderson put them somewhere for safekeeping." "No," Mr. Henderson said firmly. "I checked the safe yesterday evening. They were there. This morning they're gone, and you're the only person besides my family who has been in this house?" Grace felt her legs getting weak. This couldn't be happening. She had dedicated almost a decade of her life to this family. She had missed her own daughter's school plays to work late when the Hendersons had important dinner parties. She had worked on holidays when they needed extra help. She had treated their home like it was sacred. "Mr. Henderson, please," she said, her voice shaking. "You know me. You know I would never do something like this. Can we call the police? Maybe someone broke in during the night." His laugh was cold and bitter. "Break in? There's no sign of forced entry. Nothing else is missing. Just my watches. The watches that only someone who knew about them would take." Grace felt the room spinning around her. "Sir, I swear on my daughter's life I did not take your watches. Please, you have to believe me." "I've made my decision," Mr. Henderson said, crossing his arms. "I want you to empty your purse right here, right now." The request felt like another slap. Grace's hands trembled as she opened her worn leather purse and turned it upside down on the coffee table. Her wallet, her keys, a pack of gum, her phone, some receipts and a few loose coins scattered across the surface. Mr. Henderson barely glanced at the items. "I'm calling the police," he announced. "And I'm calling your agency to make sure they know what kind of person they've been sending to people's homes." "Please don't do this," Grace begged. "I need this job. I have a daughter in high school. I have rent to pay. If you ruin my reputation, I won't be able to find work anywhere in this city." "You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from people who trusted you," Mr. Henderson replied coldly. "People like you always think you can get away with it because you assume we won't suspect the help." The phrase "people like you" hung in the air like poison. Grace knew exactly what he meant, and it hurt worse than any of his other accusations. In that moment, she realized that all the years of dedication, all the trust she thought they had built, meant nothing. When something went wrong, she would always be the first person he suspected. "I want you out of my house immediately," Mr. Henderson continued. "Leave your key on the table and don't ever come back. I'll be calling the police as soon as you leave, and if I find out you've taken anything else, I'll make sure you go to prison." Grace placed her house key on the table with shaking hands. She had carried that key for 8 years, and it had always felt like a symbol of the trust between her and the Henderson family. Now it felt like evidence of her guilt. As she walked toward the door, Grace turned back one last time. "Mr. Henderson, I know you don't believe me, but I'm telling the truth. I hope you find your watches, and I hope you remember that not everyone who looks like me is a thief." She closed the door behind her and walked to her car on unsteady legs. As she drove away from the house that had been like a second home to her, Grace didn't know that her worst nightmare was just beginning. Grace sat in her small apartment that evening, staring at her phone. She had been fired from jobs before, but never like this. Never with accusations that could destroy her entire future. Her daughter Lisa was at her after-school job, which was a blessing because Grace didn't know how to explain what had happened. The cleaning agency had already called. Mrs. Patterson, the woman who ran the service, had been coldly professional. "Grace, I'm sorry, but we can't keep you on after what Mr. Henderson told us. We can't risk our reputation by sending someone to our clients' homes who might steal from them." Grace had tried to explain, but Mrs. Patterson wouldn't listen. In one afternoon, she had lost not just one job, but any chance of getting work through the agency that had provided her income for years. That night, Grace barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mr. Henderson's angry face and heard his accusations. She kept thinking about all the times she had gone above and beyond for his family. The time she had driven Mrs. Henderson to the hospital when she thought she was having a heart attack. The time she had worked all night to get the house ready for their daughter's wedding reception. The Christmas mornings when she had come in early to help prepare for family gatherings. None of it mattered now. The next morning, Grace's neighbor Dorothy knocked on her door. Dorothy was an older black woman who had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years and had seen her share of unfair treatment. "Honey, I heard through the grapevine what happened," Dorothy said, settling into Grace's worn couch. "That man had some nerve accusing you of stealing. I've known you since you moved here, and you're about as honest as they come." Grace told Dorothy the whole story. How Mr. Henderson had been so quick to accuse her. How he had refused to consider any other possibility. How he had made that comment about people like you. Dorothy listened carefully, nodding at the right moments. When Grace finished, Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Baby, you can't just let this slide. That man is destroying your reputation based on nothing but his assumptions. You need help." "I can't afford a lawyer, Dorothy. I don't even have a job anymore." "There are people who help folks like us," Dorothy said firmly. "Let me make some calls." That afternoon, Dorothy came back with a business card. "Community Legal Aid Center," Grace read aloud. "They help people who can't afford lawyers." The office was in an old building downtown. Nothing fancy, but the receptionist was kind and didn't make Grace feel like she was asking for charity. She was told to wait for one of their attorneys who specialized in workplace issues. 20 minutes later, a young Asian woman appeared. She was probably in her early 30s with shoulder-length black hair and a warm smile. "Hi, I'm Linda Chen."
I heard you might need some help. Grace followed Linda into a small office crowded with case files and law books.
Linda poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from Grace. Tell me what happened and don't leave out any details. For the second time in 2 days, Grace told her story. But this time someone was really listening. Linda asked questions. She took notes. She seemed genuinely concerned about what had happened. So he accused you without any evidence at all? Linda asked. Nothing, Grace confirmed. Just that I was the only one who had access to his study. What about his family members? His wife, his son? His son is away at college, but Mrs. Henderson was home the night before. She has access to everything in that house. Linda wrote more notes. Has he filed a police report yet? Grace's stomach tightened. I don't know. He said he was going to. We need to be prepared for that, Linda said. But Grace, I want you to know something. Even if he files a report, that doesn't mean you're guilty. And it doesn't mean we can't fight this. For the first time since yesterday morning, Grace felt a tiny spark of hope. What I'd like to do, Linda continued, is start our own investigation. Mr. Henderson may think he can just point a finger and destroy your life, but he's wrong. We're going to find out what really happened to those watches. Over the next few days, Linda worked fast. She called the Henderson house and spoke with Mrs. Henderson, who seemed genuinely surprised by the accusation against Grace. She had always liked Grace and couldn't believe she would steal anything. Linda also spoke with other people who worked for the Hendersons. The gardener who came twice a week. The pool cleaning service. The delivery drivers who regularly brought packages to the house. What she learned was interesting. Several people mentioned that Mr. Henderson had seemed stressed lately. The gardener said he had seen Mr. Henderson having heated phone conversations in his backyard. The pool cleaner mentioned that Mr. Henderson had asked him strange questions about how much his equipment cost and whether he knew anyone who bought used tools. Most interesting was what the UPS driver told Linda. That guy has been getting a lot of packages from strange places lately, the driver said. Pawn shops, I think. And he always meets me at the door like he doesn't want his wife to see what he's getting. Linda started researching Mr. Henderson's business. What she found made her even more suspicious. His company had been struggling for months. There were rumors about layoffs and lost contracts. Several business magazines had written articles about how the tech industry was changing and how older companies like Henderson's were having trouble keeping up. Meanwhile, Grace was trying to find other work. But word travels fast in the cleaning industry, especially in a wealthy area like Oakwood Hills. Every agency she called had already heard about the accusations. Some hung up on her as soon as she gave her name. She applied for jobs at restaurants, stores, anywhere that might hire her, but without references from her most recent employer, it was almost impossible. The few places that called her back changed their minds as soon as she had to explain why she had left her last job. Grace's savings were running out fast. She had always lived paycheck to paycheck, and now she was falling behind on rent and utilities. Lisa, her daughter, was starting to ask questions about why her mother was home all day and seemed so worried. Mom, what's wrong? Lisa asked one evening as they ate a dinner of instant noodles and canned soup. You've been different since you stopped working for that family. Grace looked at her 17-year-old daughter and felt her heart break a little more. Lisa was a good kid, honor roll student planning to go to community college next year. Grace had been so proud that she would be able to help pay for Lisa's education. Now she didn't know how they would even keep their apartment. Just some problems at work, baby. Nothing for you to worry about. But Lisa wasn't fooled. Mom, I'm not a little kid anymore. I can see you're scared. What happened? Grace almost told her everything right then. But she couldn't bring herself to explain how someone had accused her of being a thief. How someone she had trusted and worked for had been so quick to believe the worst about her. Lisa was still young enough to believe that hard work and honesty would always be rewarded. Grace didn't want to take that hope away from her. The next morning, Linda called with an update. Grace, I've been digging into Mr. Henderson's finances, and I found some very interesting things. I think we might be onto something, but I need more time to investigate. How much time? Grace asked. I'm running out of money, and if this goes on much longer, I won't be able to pay my rent. I understand, Linda said. But I promise you we're going to get to the bottom of this. And when we do, Mr. Henderson is going to regret ever accusing you of something you didn't do. Grace wanted to believe her, but as she looked around her small apartment and thought about her dwindling bank account, She wondered if hope was enough to survive on. That afternoon, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Is this Grace Williams?" The voice was official, businesslike. "Yes, this is Grace. This is Detective Johnson with the Oakwood Hills Police Department. I need to speak with you about a theft report that was filed against you. Can you come down to the station this afternoon?" Grace's hands started shaking. "Am I under arrest?" "Not at this time," the detective said. "We just need to ask you some questions." As Grace hung up the phone, she realized that her nightmare was just getting worse. But she also realized something else. She wasn't going to face this alone. She had Linda, she had Dorothy, and she had the truth on her side. That had to count for something. Grace sat in the hard plastic chair at the police station, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Detective Johnson was a middle-aged black man with kind eyes, which gave Grace a small measure of comfort. At least he might understand her situation better than some others would. "Mrs. Williams," he began, opening a file on his desk. "Mr. Henderson filed a report claiming that you stole 3 expensive watches from his home. He says you're the only person who had access to them besides his family." Grace took a deep breath. "Detective Johnson, I've been cleaning houses for 15 years. I've worked for the Henderson family for 8 of those years. I have never stolen anything from anyone, and I would never start now." Detective Johnson nodded, making notes. "Tell me about your relationship with the family. Any problems? Any disagreements about money or working conditions?" "No, sir. They've always paid me fairly and on time. Mrs. Henderson even gave me raises without me asking for them. Until this week, I thought they trusted me completely." The detective asked more questions about the day the watches went missing, about Grace's access to different parts of the house, about her financial situation. Grace answered everything honestly, even though some of the questions felt invasive. "I have to ask this," Detective Johnson said gently. "Are you having any money troubles? Any reason you might have been tempted to take something valuable?" Grace felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Detective, I'm not rich. I work hard for every dollar I earn. But I would never steal from someone, no matter how desperate I was. My mother raised me better than that." When the interview was over, Detective Johnson walked Grace to the door. "Mrs. Williams, I want you to know that filing a report doesn't mean you're guilty of anything. We investigate every complaint thoroughly. Don't leave town. And if you think of anything else that might be helpful, please call me." Grace left the police station feeling drained. Linda was waiting for her in the parking lot, having rushed over as soon as Grace called her. "How did it go?" Linda asked as they sat in her car. "The detective seemed fair, but I could tell he has to take Mr. Henderson's complaint seriously." "Linda, what if they arrest me? What if I go to jail for something I didn't do?" "That's not going to happen," Linda said firmly. "Because I've been doing some digging and I think I know what really happened to those watches." Linda had spent the last few days investigating Mr. Henderson's background more thoroughly. What she had discovered was troubling. "Grace, Mr. Henderson's company is in serious financial trouble," Linda explained as they drove back to Grace's apartment. "They've lost 3 major contracts this year, and there are rumors that they might have to declare bankruptcy. But he lives in that huge house. He drives expensive cars. That's exactly the problem. He's been living way beyond his means, and now it's catching up with him. I found records showing that he's behind on his mortgage payments and he owes money to several credit card companies." Linda had also discovered something else. Mr. Henderson had been seen at several pawn shops in the city over the past few months. She had shown his photo to clerks at different stores, and 2 of them remembered him. One of the pawn shop owners said a man matching Mr. Henderson's description came in about 6 weeks ago, asking about selling expensive watches. He wanted to know how much they would pay and whether they kept records of transactions. Grace felt her heart start to pound. "You think he sold his own watches?" "I think it's very possible. And when his wife started asking questions about where they were, he panicked and decided to blame you." That evening, Linda got a breakthrough. She had been calling pawn shops all over the city, and finally, she found one where someone remembered Mr. Henderson clearly. The clerk at Golden State Pawn said a well-dressed white man came in about 3 weeks ago and sold 3 expensive watches, Linda told Grace over the phone. "The description matches Mr. Henderson perfectly, and they still have the security footage." The next morning, Linda and Grace went to the pawn shop together. The owner, Mr. Patel, was a small man with graying hair who had run the shop for 20 years. "Oh yes, I remember him very clearly. Mr. Patel said when Linda showed him Mr. Henderson's photo from his company website. He was very nervous, kept looking around like he didn't want anyone to see him. He had 3 beautiful watches, a Rolex, an Omega, and a Patek Philippe. Grace's knees almost gave out. Those were exactly the watches Mr. Henderson had described as stolen. He said he was selling them because of a divorce and needed quick cash, Mr. Patel continued. I paid him $42,000 for all 3. I still have them in my safe if you'd like to see them. Linda asked to see the security footage from that day. The black and white video was grainy, but it clearly showed a man who looked exactly like Mr. Henderson, handing over the watches and receiving a stack of cash. Mr. Patel, would you be willing to testify about this transaction if necessary? Linda asked. Of course. I run an honest business. I keep records of everything and I don't like being involved in people's lies. As they drove back from the pawn shop, Grace felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that she could finally prove her innocence, and anger that Mr. Henderson had been willing to destroy her life, to cover up his own problems. What happens now? Grace asked. Now we take this evidence to the police and to Mr. Henderson, Linda said, and we make sure everyone knows the truth about what really happened. But Linda had one more surprise for Grace. She had also been investigating Mr. Henderson's family situation, and she had discovered that his son, Tommy, was home from college more often than his parents realized. I found social media posts showing that Tommy was actually in town the weekend before the watches went missing, Linda said. He posted photos at a local bar and tagged several friends who live here. Linda had managed to contact Tommy through a mutual friend. When she explained what was happening, Tommy agreed to meet with them. They met at a coffee shop near the university. Tommy Henderson was a tall, thin young man who looked uncomfortable and kept glancing around as if he was afraid someone would see him. I can't believe my dad did this, Tommy said after Linda explained the situation. I mean, I knew he was having money problems, but I never thought he would blame an innocent person. Tommy confirmed that he had been home several times recently without his parents knowing. He had his own key and would sometimes come by to do laundry or grab something he had forgotten. My dad has been really stressed lately, Tommy said. He and my mom fight about money all the time now. She doesn't know how bad things really are with his business. Tommy, do you know anything about your father's watch collection? Linda asked. Tommy looked even more uncomfortable. I know he's been selling stuff. I saw him looking at jewelry websites, checking prices for his watches and some of my mom's rings. When I asked him about it, he said he was just curious about their value. When was this? About 2 months ago. He made me promise not to tell my mom, said it would just worry her. Tommy also revealed something else that made Grace's stomach turn. My dad said something last week that made me really uncomfortable. He was talking about how people were always trying to take advantage of successful people like him. He said you had to be careful who you trusted, especially people who came from different backgrounds. The way Tommy said different backgrounds made it clear that Mr. Henderson had been more specific about what he meant. I'm really sorry about what happened to you. Mrs. Williams, Tommy said sincerely. My dad was wrong to accuse you. I know you would never steal from us. You were always kind to me when I was growing up. As they left the coffee shop, Linda turned to Grace with a determined look on her face. We have everything we need now. The pawn shop evidence, the financial records, Tommy's testimony about his father's behavior. It's time to confront Mr. Henderson with the truth. Grace felt nervous about facing the man who had tried to destroy her reputation, but she also felt stronger than she had in weeks. She had the truth on her side, and she had people who believed in her. What if he still tries to deny it? Grace asked. Linda smiled grimly. Then we take everything to the police, to his wife, to his business partners, and to every news outlet in the city. Men like Richard Henderson think they can ruin people like you without consequences. It's time to show him how wrong he is. That night, Grace slept better than she had since the whole nightmare began. Tomorrow she would finally get the chance to clear her name and show everyone who Richard Henderson really was. The meeting was set for Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. Linda had called Mr. Henderson's office and told his secretary that she was an attorney representing Grace Williams and needed to discuss the theft allegations. She had been deliberately vague about the purpose of the meeting, only saying it was urgent and involved new evidence. Grace barely slept the night before. She kept imagining how Mr. Henderson would react when he realized that his lies had been exposed. Would he try to deny everything? Would he become angry and defensive? Or would he finally admit what he had done? Linda had arranged for the meeting to take place at her law office rather than at Mr. Henderson's company. "I want him on our territory," she explained to Grace, "and I want him to understand that this is serious legal business." At 9:45, Grace sat in Linda's small conference room trying to calm her nerves. On the table in front of them were copies of all the evidence they had gathered. The pawnshop receipt with Mr. Henderson's signature, screenshots from the security footage showing him selling the watches, bank records showing the deposit of the money he had received, Tommy's written statement about his father's recent behavior and financial problems. "Remember," Linda said quietly, "let me do most of the talking. I know you want to tell him how much he hurt you, and you'll get that chance. But first we need to present the evidence in a way that makes it impossible for him to deny what he did." At exactly 10 o'clock, they heard voices in the outer office. Mr. Henderson had arrived with his corporate lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Victoria Mills who worked for one of the city's most expensive law firms. When Mr. Henderson walked into the conference room, Grace was struck by how different he looked. The confident, commanding presence she remembered from his home was gone. He looked tired and worried, with dark circles under his eyes and his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. "Mr. Henderson," Linda said formally, "thank you for coming. I believe you know my client, Grace Williams." Mr. Henderson barely glanced at Grace. "I don't understand why we're here. I've already filed a police report about the theft. This should be handled through proper channels." "Actually," Linda said, opening the folder in front of her, "we're here because new evidence has come to light that completely changes the situation." Victoria Mills leaned forward. "What kind of evidence?" Linda smiled coldly. "Evidence that shows Mr. Henderson's theft allegations are completely false. Evidence that shows he knows exactly what happened to those watches because he sold them himself." The color drained from Mr. Henderson's face. "That's ridiculous. I would never—" "Would you like to see the security footage from Golden State Pawn Shop?" Linda interrupted, sliding a printed screenshot across the table. "This shows you selling 3 watches to the owner on March 15th, the same watches you reported as stolen." Mr. Henderson stared at the image, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. His lawyer picked up the photo and studied it carefully. "The image quality isn't very clear," Victoria Mills said, though her voice lacked conviction. "This could be anyone." Linda pulled out another document. "Here's the receipt for the transaction signed by your client. Notice that his signature matches the signature on his police report exactly." She continued, pulling out evidence piece by piece. The bank deposit record showing the money from the pawn shop going into Mr. Henderson's personal account, the financial record showing his company's mounting debts, the witness statements from people who had seen him asking about selling valuable items. "Furthermore," Linda said, "we have a statement from your client's own son confirming that Mr. Henderson had been talking about selling his watch collection for months." Mr. Henderson finally found his voice. "Tommy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just a kid who—" "He's 20 years old," Linda cut him off. "Old enough to testify in court about what his father told him." Victoria Mills was studying all the documents carefully. Grace could see the moment when she realized that her client was caught in an impossible situation. The lawyer's professional demeanor didn't change, but she sat back in her chair with the look of someone who was calculating how to minimize damage. "Even if my client did sell some watches," Victoria said carefully, "that doesn't prove he deliberately framed Ms. Williams." Grace couldn't stay quiet any longer. "He looked me in the eye and accused me of being a thief," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "He said people like me always think we can get away with stealing from people who trust us. He knew exactly what he was doing." Mr. Henderson finally looked directly at her, and Grace saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. "Shame." "Grace." He started, then stopped. "You what?" Grace demanded. "You're sorry? You're sorry that you destroyed my reputation? You're sorry that you cost me my job and made it impossible for me to find work? You're sorry that my daughter has to see her mother struggle to pay rent because of your lies?" Linda put a gentle hand on Grace's arm, but she wasn't finished. "I worked for your family for 8 years, Grace continued. "I took care of your house like it was my own. I was there when your mother was sick. I helped you get ready for your daughter's wedding. I thought you respected me, but the moment something went wrong, you assumed I was a criminal." Mr. Henderson's head dropped into his hands. "I was desperate," he said quietly. "The business is failing. We're about to lose the house. I sold the watches to try to catch up on the mortgage payments, and when Helen started asking about them, I panicked. So you decided to destroy an innocent woman's life instead of telling your wife the truth? Linda asked. I wasn't thinking clearly, Mr. Henderson said. I thought it would buy me time to figure something else out. I thought maybe if I could get some insurance money or... I don't know what I was thinking. Victoria Mills looked like she wanted to tell her client to stop talking. But it was too late. Mr. Henderson was falling apart in front of them. I never meant for it to go this far, he said. I thought maybe you'd just find another job and it would all blow over. Grace stared at him in disbelief. You thought I'd just disappear quietly while people thought I was a thief? Do you have any idea what you've done to me? My daughter can't even look at me anymore, Grace continued. She knows something is wrong, but I can't bring myself to tell her that someone accused her mother of stealing. My neighbors whisper about me when I walk by. I've applied for dozens of jobs and nobody will hire me because of what you said about me. Mr. Henderson was openly crying now. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Linda pulled out one more document. This is a lawsuit for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with economic opportunity. We're seeking damages for lost wages, damage to reputation, and emotional suffering. Victoria Mills read through the papers quickly. What do you want? She asked. First, Linda said, Mr. Henderson needs to call the police and withdraw his false report. Second, he needs to call Grace's former employer and every person he told about the alleged theft and retract his accusations. Third, he needs to pay substantial damages for what he's put Grace through. And fourth, Grace added, he needs to publicly apologize. I want everyone who heard his lies to hear his apology. Mr. Henderson looked up at Grace with red, swollen eyes. I'll do whatever you want. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll do everything I can to make this right. Victoria Mills was frantically taking notes. We'll need time to review the settlement terms. No, Linda interrupted. Mr. Henderson starts making this right today, or we file the lawsuit this afternoon and release all of this evidence to the media. I'm sure his business partners and his, wife would be very interested to know the truth about what kind of man they're dealing with, the threat of public exposure seemed to terrify Mr. Henderson more than the lawsuit. Please, he begged. My wife doesn't know about any of this. If this gets out, it will destroy my family. Grace felt a moment of sympathy for him, thinking about his wife and children. But then she remembered how he had been willing to destroy her family to protect his own secrets. You should have thought about that before you decided to make me your scapegoat, Grace said firmly. The meeting continued for another hour as they worked out the details of Mr. Henderson's public retraction and apology. He would call Detective Johnson that afternoon and admit he had filed a false report. He would call Mrs. Patterson at the cleaning agency and explain that Grace had been falsely accused. He would write letters of apology to every person he had told about the alleged theft. As they prepared to leave, Mr. Henderson made one final plea. Grace, I know you have every right to hate me, but please know that I never meant for things to get this bad. I was drowning and I made a terrible mistake. Grace looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Henderson, I don't hate you, but I want you to understand something. When you accused me of stealing, you didn't just hurt me financially. You attacked my character, my integrity, everything I've worked to build in my life. That's not something you can fix with money or apologies. But it's a start, she added quietly. As they walked out of the building, Linda put her arm around Grace's shoulders. How do you feel? Grace thought about it for a moment. Relieved, she said finally, and ready to start rebuilding my life. 3 months later, Grace stood in front of her bathroom mirror adjusting the collar of her new business shirt. Today was the grand opening of Fresh Start Cleaning Services, her own company. After everything she had been through with Mr. Henderson, Grace had decided she was done working for other people's agencies. If she was going to clean houses, she was going to do it on her own terms. The settlement money from Mr. Henderson had made it possible. $50,000 for damages, plus his promise to provide a positive reference letter for her new business. Linda had negotiated hard, arguing that Grace deserved compensation not just for her lost wages, but for the emotional trauma and damage to her reputation. You look professional, Mom, Lisa said, appearing in the doorway. Grace's daughter had finally learned the whole truth about what had happened with the Hendersons, and she had been furious on her mother's behalf. I can't believe that man tried to destroy you like that. Grace had been worried about telling Lisa the story, but her daughter had surprised her with her maturity and understanding. "Baby, sometimes people do terrible things when they're scared and desperate. It doesn't excuse what he did, but I don't want you to become bitter because of it." "I'm not bitter, Mom. I'm proud of you for fighting back and proving your innocence." The doorbell rang and Grace opened it to find Dorothy, her neighbor, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "For luck on your first day as a business owner," Dorothy said with a warm smile. "I always knew you were destined for bigger things than working for other people." Grace's first client of the day was Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who had heard about Grace's story through the community network. Word had spread quickly about how Grace had been falsely accused and how she had fought back to clear her name. Instead of hurting her reputation, the story had actually gained her sympathy and admiration from people who understood what it was like to be unfairly judged. "I specifically wanted to hire you because of what you went through," Mrs. Rodriguez explained as she showed Grace around her modest home. "I know what it's like when people make assumptions about you based on how you look or where you come from. I figured someone who had been through that would understand the importance of trust and respect." Grace spent the morning cleaning Mrs. Rodriguez's house with extra care. Every room sparkled when she was finished, and Mrs. Rodriguez was so impressed that she immediately recommended Grace to 3 of her neighbors. By noon, Grace had received 2 more calls from potential clients. People weren't just hiring her for her cleaning skills, they were hiring her because they respected her story and wanted to support someone who had overcome injustice. Linda called during Grace's lunch break. "How's the first day going?" "Better than I ever imagined," Grace said. "I already have 5 clients lined up for next week and I haven't even finished today yet." "That's wonderful," Linda said. "You know, I've been thinking about your story a lot. Have you ever considered sharing it publicly? Maybe speaking at community groups or writing about it?" Grace had been thinking about the same thing. She had been contacted by a reporter from the local newspaper who wanted to write about her case, and a community organization had asked her to speak at their monthly meeting about workplace discrimination. "I think I might," Grace said. "If my story can help other people who are going through similar situations, then maybe some good can come out of what happened." That afternoon, Grace's last client was a surprise. When she pulled up to the address, she recognized the neighborhood immediately. It was just a few streets away from where the Hendersons lived. The client was Mrs. Park, a Korean-American woman who had recently moved to the area with her family. As Grace cleaned her house, Mrs. Park mentioned that she had heard about Grace from other families in the neighborhood. "I hope you don't mind me asking," Mrs. Park said carefully, "but are you the woman who was falsely accused by that businessman a few months ago?" Grace paused in her dusting. "Yes, that was me. I wanted to hire you specifically because of how you handled that situation," Mrs. Park said. "My family has faced discrimination too, and I have a lot of respect for someone who was willing to fight back and clear their name." As Grace drove home that evening, she reflected on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been just another house cleaner, invisible to most of the wealthy families she worked for. Now she was a small business owner with a growing reputation and a story that resonated with people throughout the community. The legal case against Mr. Henderson had been resolved quickly once all the evidence came out. He had admitted to filing a false police report and had faced both legal consequences and professional embarrassment. His business had eventually declared bankruptcy, and he and his family had been forced to sell their mansion and move to a smaller home across town. Grace had heard, through the neighborhood network, that Mr. Henderson was in counseling and attending meetings for gambling addiction. He was working as a consultant now, making a fraction of what he used to earn. His wife had stayed with him, but their marriage was reportedly strained. Grace felt sorry for his family, especially his children, but she couldn't bring herself to feel too much sympathy for Mr. Henderson himself. He had made his choices and now he had to live with the consequences. A week after starting her business, Grace received an unexpected phone call. It was Mrs. Henderson. "Grace," the woman said, her voice shaky and emotional, "I know I have no right to call you after what Richard did, but I needed to apologize." Grace wasn't sure how to respond. Mrs. Henderson had always been kind to her, but she had also been quick to believe her husband's accusations. "Mrs. Henderson, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," the woman interrupted. "I should have known better. I should have stood up for you. You worked for our family for 8 years and I knew the kind of person you were. But when Richard told me what happened, I believed him without question. Mrs. Henderson went on to explain how she had discovered the truth about her husband's financial problems and his gambling addiction. I feel like I didn't even know the man I was married to, and I feel terrible that you suffered because of our problems. I appreciate your apology, Grace said sincerely. I know this hasn't been easy for your family either. I heard you started your own business, Mrs. Henderson continued. I think that's wonderful. You deserve so much better than what happened to you. After they hung up, Grace realized that Mrs. Henderson's call had given her a sense of closure she hadn't known she needed. It felt good to know that at least one member of the Henderson family understood how much damage had been done and was genuinely sorry about it. 2 months later, Grace was invited to speak at a conference about workplace rights and discrimination. She stood in front of an audience of 200 people and told her story with confidence and dignity. I learned that sometimes the people who seem to have the most power are actually the most afraid, she said. Mr. Henderson was so scared of losing his reputation and his lifestyle that he was willing to destroy an innocent person to protect himself. But I also learned that the truth has its own power, and if you're persistent and you have good people supporting you, the truth will come out. After her speech, dozens of people approached her with their own stories of unfair treatment and false accusations. Grace realized that her experience, as painful as it had been, had given her a platform to help others who faced similar challenges. By the end of her first year in business, Fresh Start Cleaning Services had 12 employees and a waiting list of clients. Grace had moved to a bigger apartment and had been able to help Lisa with her college expenses. More importantly, she had gained something that no amount of money could buy: the knowledge that she could overcome injustice and build something positive from even the worst experiences. One evening, as Grace was finishing up paperwork for her business, Lisa came and sat beside her at the kitchen table. "Mom, I want you to know how proud I am of you," Lisa said. "Not just for starting your own business, but for how you handled everything that happened. You could have become angry and bitter, but instead you turned it into something positive." Grace looked at her daughter and smiled. "You know what I learned through all of this? When people try to tear you down, the best revenge is building yourself back up even stronger than before." "Is that what you did?" "That's exactly what I did," Grace said. "And it was worth every struggle to get here." As she looked around her apartment, filled with the laughter of her daughter and the satisfaction of honest work, Grace realized that Mr. Henderson had unintentionally given her the greatest gift of all. His false accusations had forced her to discover her own strength and resilience. They had pushed her to create a better life for herself and her daughter. She had lost a job, but she had gained a business. She had lost an employer's trust, but she had gained the respect of an entire community. She had faced her worst nightmare, but she had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. Grace Williams was no longer just a house cleaner. She was an entrepreneur, an advocate, and an inspiration to anyone who had ever been underestimated or unfairly judged, and that was something no one could ever take away from her.